This is a little bit more on the ontology of meat, mostly prompted by Nick, Modern Mystic's video. Can't remember which one it was, but he was talking about, I'm referring to one of my videos in there, about thingness, and whether, you know, what it is for a thing to be a thing, and whether meat was a thing, or whether Christmas Day was a thing, or, you know, these various examples. So I've been thinking about that, and trying to get some more cogent examples, because I'm still not happy with the examples that I gave in previous videos, to try and understand it better. And just this idea of thingness, really, because I think there's something interesting there, because, you know, concepts don't always refer to things. You know, I have a concept of a tree and there's a tree, so there's a kind of one-to-one relationship. But those concepts don't always refer to material objects out there in the world or material processes out there in the world. Sometimes they're just other things. But let's just hold on that for a sec, because obviously sometimes they do refer to things, like the tree example, or as I say, to processes, which are just kind of things that have a dimension across, or a profile across time, aren't they? But so things, and so I need to think whether meat, and these other examples I'm going to give in a sec, is a thing or not. Because before you can decide whether to believe in something or not, you have to think whether it really exists as a thing or not, I believe. And if it is a thing, what kind of a thing is it? What kind of a thing is meat? Is it a natural thing, a natural category, or is it a socially constructed category? Is it what's that line? Is it born meat? Does it acquire the status of meat, or does it have the status of meat thrust upon it? If I can borrow from Shakespeare. Anyway, before I go, I don't want to do much about meat here, really, because I'm really talking about the ontological status of certain entities which are parallels, or which are analogues to that. Not forgetting that I started off this by talking about analogies between God and meat, and really between atheism, theism, and vegetarianism, non-vegetarianism. So it's that analogy. So, you know, in the same way that, well, as I say, I'm not going to talk about meat, but, you know, does God exist? When we say does God exist, I think we mean, does he exist as a thing? And if it is a thing, actually I think everybody who's a theist, or certainly a fundamental theist or a literal theist, would say God exists as a thing. In fact, I think to say that God doesn't exist but is not a thing, I think that's meaningless. To say something exists as a thing, you would have to say, what kind of thing is it? What kind of a thing is God? Remembering again that processes are things. Is God, again, as I say, natural or socially constructed? Fundamentalist theists would say natural. Someone like myself would probably say socially constructed, to the extent it exists at all. The question there would be, you know, was he born God? Did he acquire the status of godliness, or did he have godliness thrust upon him? But other examples, again, it's not, you know, it's hard to argue that, because, you know, you get into arguments about whether God exists or not, and it just brings all that kind of weird other baggage with it. So I'm thinking about things that really do exist, that you can point to in the world, that have irrefutable status as real objects and real things in the world that no one, I don't think, would quibble with, and then talk about their status. So I've talked about 3 examples and rejected a few. I'll just talk about the ones I rejected first. The first one I thought about was Jews. Jews. Does the concept of Jews exist in the real world? Well, yeah. You know, you go to a synagogue now, are Jews. Some of my best friends are Jews, etc. You know, that whole thing. And then we could have a discussion about whether that is a natural category of people, or whether that's a socially constructed category. And then we could reframe that in terms of, you know, are people born Jews? Do they acquire Jewishness, or do they have their Jewishness thrust upon them? We could have that kind of conversation. But I decided not to pursue that, because it's probably, again, a bit of a hot button topic. It'll get confusing, so I didn't want to go anywhere with that. Then the second one I thought of was weeds. Weeds, you know, those things that grow in your garden. That's got a bit more mileage in it, I think, in terms of being able to talk about it without getting all aerated. You know, because weeds are just flowers in the wrong place, aren't they? I mean, that's essentially what a weed is. There's no real difference between a weed and the flower that's 2 inches to the left of it. And in fact, if you go to different gardens, you will see different parts of the world, you will see different flowers and different plants being categorized as weeds or not. So there's no denying that they exist. You know, there they are. You know, whether they would exist in the absence of gardeners and vegetable growers, I don't know. But you know, they undoubtedly do exist in the world that we live in. But again, you know, are they a natural category? No. No biologist or botanist, I think, has the category of weeds in any of the books on their bookshelves. So not a natural category. Is that something that they acquire the status of weeds, or do they have the status of weeds thrust upon them? Probably the latter. I mean, that's got to be the case, hasn't it? You know, people call them weeds. They really are there. You can't dispute it. And there are products you can buy to banish them. You know, you can buy a Roundup from the shop, which will identify that category of plant that it will selectively destroy. So clearly there are, you know, it is a well-bounded concept, relatively well-bounded concept, but completely constructed. But again, I could go on about that, but it's a bit of a boring example. It's not as inflammatory as Jews, but a bit boring. So I thought about murder. That was going to be my third example. Murder. So of course murder exists in the real. This is the reason why I called the previous video "Meat or Murder." It's a bit of a play on Morrissey's "Meat is Murder" as well, of course. But what I was thinking about at the time was the ontological status of these terms. How interesting they are. Because murder is one of those too, isn't it? I mean, there's no disputing its existence in the world, and it's, you know, it exists as a completely not just a real thing, but a highly emotional and potent thing in the world, and it's very, very tightly described. You know, there are, you know, thousands and thousands of pages of legislation written about it, and as I say, tightly defined by legal precedent and by, you know, what's written in the statute books, and lots of qualifications about when an activity which looks like murder is not actually murder, and the conditions in which one person can kill another when it isn't murder. You know, so it's not only is it a real thing in the world, it's probably one of the best described things that you can get. But does it exist? Well, yes, it exists as a thing, but how does it exist? Is it a natural category, or is it socially constructed? Is it was it born as murder, or did it have murder thrust upon it? Did it have the status of murder thrust upon it? Again, I think it's socially constructed, isn't it? You know, before there were people, and before there was jurisprudence, and before there was the various things that existed before jurisprudence in the form of vendettas and all that kind of stuff, there would be no such thing as murder. There's no murder in the animal kingdom. Animals kill one another for all the time, either for meat or just for sport. But you wouldn't say it's murder. You wouldn't say that the cat, with its tail with its paw on the tail of the mouse, you know, letting it go and then catching, then going catching it, and eventually biting its head off. You wouldn't say it's murder. You would call it something else. Murder is a human concept, but it's a human constructed concept, very narrowly defined, carved out of all the other killings that go on. You know, because far, far, far more people are killed by one another than constitute murder. You know, killing in wartime is fine. Killing in revenge is kind of okay. Killing in self-defense is okay. There's lots and lots of killings go on, but only a very, very small subset, clearly defined by law, counts as murder. And what constitutes that boundary varies according to whereabouts in the world you happen to be and who you happen to be killing. So I think murder does work quite well as an analogy, actually, because it's similar things for meat, which is, as I say, where I started from with this, and maybe for God. It's a thing in the world. You can point to it. You can look it up in books. There it is. You can see examples of it all over the place, just like meat. But it's not a natural category. It didn't pre-exist our arrival on the planet. And it's socially defined very, very closely according to well articulated rules of law and rules of ethics. In the same way that meat is, I think. It's carved out of the flesh of the world according to very, very prescriptive terms. So I think saying you don't believe in meat is the same as saying you don't believe in murder. course, you don't deny its existence. You just don't believe in it as a natural category. And if it doesn't exist as a natural category, then naturalist arguments for its existence don't work really. Same as for weeds, and for God, and for Jews, and for whatever else I've talked about the other day.